Rostermania is underway, and recently there have been some reports regarding the Thieves and some of their possible roster moves, which I think is kind of a big deal, knowing that going into this offseason, there were a lot of different opinions on whether or not the Thieves should or should not make a change. But as of late, we've heard a couple reports saying that it is seeming to be more likely that they will make a change. Initially, the Ghost of Hope on X had posted that the Thieves were not looking to change, that they were going to stick together. And of course, naturally, based on how the Thieves fans have been leading up to the offseason, you had a very big mix of emotions. I am one that I kind of liked hearing that. I thought it was smart for the Thieves to stick because I feel like everybody kind of did a good job playing their role when the Thieves were kind of firing on all cylinders. So I was pretty excited to see that the odds were that the Thieves were going to stick. Unfortunately, things got a little hectic the next day. The next day, it came out that there were rumors that the Thieves are looking to make a change for Dan Ghosty. Now, the people that they had mentioned in Ronnie's article on the Breaking Point website was Abuza is probably their number one target from the Vancouver Surge. Then they have Celium from Atlanta FaZe and Draza from Atlanta FaZe as well. And kind of an interesting trio there because don't get me wrong, I think Abuza is a really good player. I think he has a lot of talent and I could see him fitting into the Thieves scheme, but it doesn't really feel like it's a plus or minus move for the Thieves. It really does kind of just feel pretty lateral. I feel like statistically speaking, Abuza was not like much better than Ghosty. Obviously, not everything is about stats, and I'm sure there's some intangibles that Abuza brings that Ghosty doesn't. But I think my worry with that is the opposite. Is I feel like there's intangibles that Dan brings that Abuza might not, and knowing that this team had already played with Dan, it makes it a little concerning for me knowing that now there's some risk involved on a move that again I don't necessarily feel is an upgrade or a downgrade. So that's where the worry of the risk comes into play. Now, that has sounded to be the most likely move that the Thieves would make. Um, as I mentioned, sell is another option. And I don't know how I feel about the sell situation because it just doesn't seem very likely. I feel like out of him or Draza, I feel like he is more likely than Draza, but it still doesn't feel like he would fit the Thieves scheme as much. Now, I feel like because he's a big name superstar player, that he would be the type of guy that the roster who is sticking together, which sounds like it would be Scrap, Hydra, and Envoy. I feel like Celium would be the guy that they would want to keep, or they would want to bring on the team, I should say. But when we hear about some other reports that have come out recently, again from the Ghost of Hope, he mentioned that the decision to move is more so because of management and not so much because of the actual players. His original report about the players deciding to stick is because that's exactly what it was. The players want to stick, or they were willing to stick it out and they were willing to play another year together. But apparently, management, not sure exactly what that entails, decided they don't know if they want to do that. Now, naturally, we have the two coaches. We have Shane and we have Sender, as well as Nade Shot and even Mud Dog, who, if I'm not mistaken, is still some form of esports management. Um, uh, there's a couple people there that could be making that decision, and it just seems kind of interesting to me that they would want to move on from Dan. Now, if I had to guess, I feel like the decisions are not necessarily being made by Nade Shot and or Mud Dog, like I said, if he's still in that GM type of position or some type of managerial role, I should say, for the Thieves. I think it's more so due to the coaching staff because the coaching staff is there on a day-to-day basis. They get to see it happen. they get to see all the behind the scenes, things that we don't necessarily get to see as fans. And they're going to have a lot more insight on how they believe the team actually functions versus how we do. And I just feel like that it only makes sense that they would be the ones to make that type of decision. Now, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I necessarily agree because, I mean, if the team was willing to run it back, I feel like you kind of want to stick with that. But if the coaches are seeing something that us as fans don't see, then I kind of understand making the change. But that brings me to believe that there's something internally that Dan was kind of doing, maybe not intentionally, maybe not in a bad way, but just it's not meshing with the team. And so that's why they're looking to replace him. I'm not really sure. It's kind of an interesting situation because like we said, it went so back and forth so quickly. One day, Ghost of Hope said that the team is sticking, and then literally the very next day, it came out that they were planning on replacing Ghosty, which I think also came to a shock or came as a shock to a lot of people because a lot of people were kind of thinking that Envoy was going to be the one to be replaced based on the late season struggles, I guess you could say. But I figured Dan was going to stick because I feel like his communication and his leadership has been really good. And that's obviously an intangible asset that he has. That's something that the stats are not going to show about him. So when he struggles more statistically, I feel like in some regard, he gets a little bit of a pass because you know his communication and, like I said, the intangibles are still there. Not that I think Envoy gets or deserves some of the shots that are coming his way, but it just to me it kind of gives him a little bit more of a pass in that regard. So hearing that he's kind of the target for them to replace, and then Abuza being like the number one is kind of interesting to me. Um, the other thing that's really interesting to me is Draza. I know I mentioned Celium a little bit, but Draza is like a really big shock to me because like that just seems impossible. That just seems like one of those things that it would shock the entire league if Scrap and Draza were able to squash their beef because it's not only about Draza and Scrap in game, it's also between the girlfriends out of game. And once you have more than just the two players involved, I think that's when things start to become a little more complicated. And I just don't see those two being able to make up to come on to the same team. Now, don't get me wrong; those two players together would be insane. That would be a dirty duo that would do a lot of great things. I feel like for the LA Thieves. But the other thing with Draza is there's rumors that have come out that he wants to team with Kenny, and naturally, if him and Kenny want to play together, I think that's going to be more of the priority. So I feel like Draza is kind of out the window. When they mentioned that they would want to bring him in, it kind of was already off the table, like I said, because of the beef. But then hearing more reports about that he wants to play with Kenny, and then there's some rumors that they might want to play with Joe DeCeves and Abizi, I believe. Now, side note, that is a great team, and I would love to watch that team compete. They would be really fun. But it just seems very unlikely that Draza will be the guy they pick up. So it makes sense that he was kind of like the last on the list. But again, just the change for Ghosty is very interesting, and the fact that it's a managerial decision is kind of surprising. Like I said, that's what makes me think that there is something going on internally in the camp where maybe the coaches are seeing that the teamwork just doesn't fit as well as they felt like, or they felt there was a drop off maybe from the start of the season to the end of the season. Things maybe just aren't clicking the way they want them to, and they feel they have a better chance of making a change and bringing in somebody who might bring maybe a little more consistency or is just going to be able to mesh better with the, I guess, in some sense, trio that they're planning to keep. Now, who they end up choosing along the way, I'm not sure. Like I said, I think Abuza is a good player and I wouldn't mind him on the team. But if we're saying Abuza for Ghosty when Ghosty has already been on this team and we saw how they played as a unit together this year and what their potential is, I don't know if I necessarily love that move. it just it feels like a little too risky in that regard. Now, like I said, you're keeping kind of like a trio together, so in some sense, the team play style is probably not going to change too much, but adding in another player and having to figure out that team chemistry again, that could cause a little bit of hiccups. I just don't know how to feel about it. The Cell situation, I think I would probably prefer a little more over Abuza, mainly because Cell naturally brings some star power. You know, no matter what, he's going to be a consistent slayer and he's going to get kills when you need them. Do I think the Thieves absolutely need kills? No, I don't. If you're keeping Scrap and you're keeping Hydra, I think kills are probably like the least of your worries. But he just brings a little more consistency, and I feel like because he's been around a little longer, I would feel more comfortable with a player like Celium, especially if you're moving. Again, I just feel like the move needs to be a guaranteed upgrade, and I think Celium in some regard does bring a guaranteed upgrade. Now, I've said before, I don't think he's my favorite pick to replace Dan. Obviously, there's a lot of good talent that is free agents right now in the SMG role. We really haven't seen too much when it comes to the AR role that are free agents. So you kind of have to just take what you can get. And I feel like for me, Celium could bring an upgrade. I would understand that change more so than a Ghosty for a Booza change. That's kind of the reason why I would be a little more okay with Celium. But as I said before, to me, I think that Thieves sticking with what they have is probably the best option, at least when it comes to the AR roles. I just don't feel like there's as much talent in the AR pool this off season. It's very heavily like SMG talent, I feel like. And obviously, if the Thieves are planning on keeping Envoy, then there is no need to look out for SMG talent. Now, you could maybe talk about like a Kleenex, a guy who you could bring back on as a flex and have him play the flex and have Scrap go to the main AR. But then you're starting to look at Scrap is going to have to play a little bit of a slower pace. And I don't know if that's necessarily the best move for the Thieves. I feel like you want to keep Scrap at a faster pace. That's the other reason why I think Celium could be a good fit because he is going to be the main AR role. He's going to be able to play a little more passive. And in some regard, you could argue that he's going to be able to play the like baity play style that people have brought up in kind of a positive way because of the slaying power that comes with Hydra and Scrap. Now, obviously, he's played with Simp and Abizi for the last however many years, and that doesn't always work out, but it can. That's a little bit more of the concern for me regarding Cell. I've seen a couple people talk about the fact that he hasn't changed his play style for Phase. What makes us think he's going to change it for the Thieves? And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But sometimes, different scenery does different things for different players. That's just the reality of it. And maybe he comes to the Thieves and maybe everything clicks. And next thing you know, we have another high powered super team, if you want to call it that. I don't necessarily like calling the team a super team until we kind of see what happens. But, a team that on paper should be extremely dominant. So for me, I think at the end of the day, if the Thieves are going to make this change, out of all the three players that have been rumored to this team, I would probably prefer Celium the most. Like I said, I still don't necessarily love the move, but at least it makes a little more sense to me. The Abuza thing just feels a little too linear. And that's just I don't know. Again, I'll welcome him with open arms. That's for sure. I mean, anybody who comes to the Thieves, I'm going to accept. I just don't know. I can't see the reasoning behind it. So I'm really interested to see, no matter what the decision is at the end of the day, I want to hear the reasoning on why they thought the way they did or what their thought process was going into next season once it's announced whoever this player is. So I'm really interested in seeing that. Obviously, more news is probably going to come out fairly soon. It seems like there's certain pieces that might be starting to fall into place. Nothing has been like official yet. There's been no official updates on anybody being picked up by another team or anybody like officially being like dropped. I feel like naturally, when you say you're an unrestricted free agent, I think it's kind of looked at as you being dropped. But there has not been anything that has says like this player is going here, this player is going here, anything like that. So there's going to be more news coming soon. Obviously, anytime we get more Thieves information, I plan on doing another video like this and letting you guys know my thoughts on it and just kind of what to be on the lookout for. So I appreciate everybody who is subscribed to the channel. If you are not already, please hit that subscribe button and hit the bell notification or to turn on notifications. And keep an eye out for any new videos that are related to Rostermania because I'm sure we're going to have more. It's a long off season and there's a lot that could happen. A lot of good free agents. So be on the lookout for that. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Peace.